Thanks for tuning in at Brackeys.
Hello everyone and welcome to this video on creating a tower defense game in Unity. Today we are going to be fading between scenes, something a lot of you guys have been requesting me to do, and so finally we're going to do it. So let's just jump right into Unity here, and I basically just want to start by creating some very simple UI that we can animate on and off whenever we want to fade. So let's just go in here and right click, go on the UI and select canvas. Let's drag this to the top of our level. And we already have a lot of different canvases in here, but it's going to make it a lot easier if we just have this sit on a separate one. Let's right click on this canvas, go UI and select image. And basically what I want to do is just stretch this image to fit the entire screen. So we'll go over here, we'll hold down Alt and we'll click in the bottom right corner to make sure it will always stretch to fit the screen. So this is our source image, and this is basically what we'll be animating on and off in order to create this fading behavior. In our case, I want this to be black, so I'll just set the color to black here, and I'll set the alpha to 0. But what you can do is choose any kind of color, and you can even go in here and specify an image, preferably something that fits the entire screen. If we go in here and select our laser beamer, that looks kind of weird, but we could essentially animate that on and off in case you want to create kind of a loading graphic. But in our case, again, we'll just go with the standard fade to black. So what we'll do now is go to our canvas and remove the graphic raycaster. This will just make sure that whenever we play the game and try and select other UI elements, it will not block our rays so that we are actually still able to interact with the UI. That would just be really annoying that if some invisible image was blocking our ability to interact with the UI. And yeah, everything else looks pretty good. One thing I will do is just rename this to something like maybe just black actually, or fade image or whatever. Awesome. So now let's go ahead and create a script that will control the alpha channel for our black image. And we could just put this on the game master, and that would definitely make sense. But I want to go ahead and create it on a separate object so that we can turn this object into a prefab that we can just drag into any scene that we want to have fading in. So let's just create an empty object, reset the transform, and let's name this something like scene fader. And let's also add a component called scene fader of type C#. We can then drag this object to the top here and drag our canvas as a child of that scene fader object. Now let's double click on the scene fader to open it up in Visual Studio, and let's have a look at actually scripting this out. So the base of what we're going to be doing today is actually fairly simple. I mean, we are just going to animate a single number, which is the alpha channel on our image, over time. But because we are dealing with kind of doing things after a certain amount of seconds, say fading out and then loading in a new scene and having those kind of timings in there, it's much easier if we use coroutines. And coroutines are a bit weird syntax wise. So just stick with me here and try and absorb everything you can. And some things, remember, you just have to learn by doing and try and get it in there and see if it works. And then you can always get caught up on how everything is actually working behind the scenes at a later point. So up here, we're going to be using a lot of namespace. Of course, we are going to be using Unity Engine. We're also going to be using system.collections for allowing us to do coroutines, the IEnumerator stuff. We'll also be using Unity Engine.UI because we want a reference to our image, and Unity Engine.scene management because we want to be able to change scenes. So the base of what we want here is just a reference to our image. So let's create a public variable of type image, and let's call this one just image. And let's just save this right away and jump into Unity and reference it. So let's just select our scene fader, and let's find our black image and drag it into this slot. This way we won't forget. We'll also want some kind of function that will fade in and another one for fading out. And we want these to be of type IEnumerator. So instead of writing void here, we write IEnumerator, which is a scary word, and then we write something like fade in, and everything else is just like a normal function. Then what we do is we think a bit about what do we actually want to happen. Well, when we fade in, that means we want to go from black to seeing our scene. And that means that we'll have to animate our image from having an alpha of 1 and then slowly down to 0, which means that it slowly disappears and underneath our scene is revealed, and so it's fading in. So when we fade in, we actually want to make a number smaller. And the way that we do this is by first having an idea of time. So let's create a variable here of type float, which we call t, and we set that equal to, we can set it equal to 0 by default, or we could set it equal to 1 because we want to animate from 1 to 0. So let's just do that. And then we'd say while t is greater than 0, then we want to do something. So we want to keep on animating until our t value here, our time value, reaches 0. And so every time we actually go through this, we want to decrease our time value. So we'll do t minus equals time.delta time. And right now you might think, well, why are we using time.delta time when we are not inside of the update method? And that's a totally valid question to ask, because if we just looked at this like a normal function, we would think that t would just decrease in like a single frame and we wouldn't notice a thing. But this is the power of using an enumerator. We can go in here and we can control exactly when we want it to actually skip a frame, or wait a frame, or wait a certain amount of seconds. And that's what we'll do. So every time we decrease our t variable, we also want to go in here and say yield return 0. And what yield return 0 means is basically just skip to the next frame. So just wait a frame and then continue. So basically what we have here now is a function that when we call it, creates a variable called t and sets it equal to the value 1. Then we say that while t is larger than 0, which it definitely is in the beginning, we want to decrease it by a tiny bit of time, and then we want to wait until the next frame, and it's still not less than, or it's still bigger than 0, so we want to decrease it again, wait a single frame, and we keep on going until it reaches 0, and then we get down here. Okay, so we have this loop that will animate slowly over time, at the same rate as our update loop would, until it reaches a certain point, at which point we can then, well, say load is scene or do something else. But in our case, we're fading in, so we don't want to load anything. Basically, we don't want anything to happen here. So yeah, that's awesome, but we aren't displaying our t value anywhere. What we want to do is, of course, have this be displayed on the alpha channel. And we could very easily just go in here and say that image.color.alpha should be equal to our t value. And actually we can't do that directly because we can't modify alpha on its own. We can only modify the entire color, which means that we have to input both red, green, blue, and the alpha at once. So what we can do instead is we can create a new color and we can give it a value of 0, 0, 0 if you want it to be black like me. And then I'm not black, but I want it to be black. That was a weird sentence, and we can continue. So, and then we can input our alpha here, which is going to be our value t. So in this case, it's going to just animate from 0 to 1 over 1 second. So, and you could of course multiply a speed onto this if you wanted to. We could just go in here and decrease with time.delta time, multiply with some speed value. That could be 1 if you want it to be from 0 to 1 in 1 second, 2 if you want it to be from 0 to 1 in a half a second, or 0.5 if you want there to go 2 seconds. So you can of course add that in there, but I'm going to show you something much cooler. So this is of course going to work, except of course we have to call the function. So let's now create a start method. So as soon as we start the game, we want to call this fade-in function. And remember again, when we have to do with coroutines, we of course don't just call the function. That would be way too easy. What we do instead is we go start coroutine, and then we input the function into that start coroutine method. So that's how we call a coroutine instead of an ordinary function. So let's save that, and we should see now that if we just pause the game, hit play, and then and you can see something is wrong with the way we're drawing things here. We'll fix that in just a moment. But you can see here that if I now unpause it, it's going to animate slowly and fade in. So that's awesome. So let me just fix that small error there. And that is because I messed up the sort order for some reason. Did I change it on something else? I have no idea what I did. Maybe it just didn't save. So let's just go in here and bump up the sort order. There we go. And now you should see my point that we are able to, yeah, it influences all UI elements. So we already have fading in. But one thing that we could do that's a lot cooler is give ourselves ultimate control over how the fade-in occurs. Because what a lot of movies and also games do is they don't have a linear fade-in. They have kind of a curve with different kind of properties to it. They might have like a positive swing on the curve. They might have a negative swing on the curve. I'm just going to show you what you can do with this stuff. And Unity has a really, really cool way of easily implementing these kind of curves. It's called the animation curve. So let's just create a new public animation curve here. And let's call this our fade curve, or maybe just curve. And we can save that. And we can just head into Unity and see what that looks like. And you might have seen this before when it comes to doing animation. So this gives us this curve, and they have some presets here. So you can see the linear one would be the exact same as we just had. If we use this, it's just going to slowly go linearly from 0 to 1. We could also use this one, which gives it a kind of a negative curve here. You can see that it slowly increases and then it goes faster and faster. We can also use this one, where it very quickly increases and then it kind of slows down until the very end. A lot of movies actually use this. Some use this, and of course some use linear transitions. Or you could go completely crazy and make your own curves in here, which I'm going to show you how it looks in a second. This will actually kind of fade it in and then fade it out and then fade it back in. So let's use this curve. So basically, in order to apply the curve, what we do is we, instead of just inputting our t value here, we apply an extra step. So let's create a float a for the alpha value, and we set that equal to, and then we use the t value here, the time value, as the input for our curves. So basically, this down here will be our t value. So say our t value is 0.3. In our case, the curve would give us a value of about 0.1. If it was 0.6, it would give us a value of around, I believe that's something like 0.35. And you get the idea. So basically what we'll do is just go in here and say that we want a to be equal to curve dot evaluate, and then we give it the t time. Awesome. So in our case, of course, because we're going from 1 to 0, it's going to animate from the top here and then all the way down. So that would look something like this. It looks really nice. And just to show you that this is actually different than before, let me just try to give you a really weird looking curve. And just to show you, and you wouldn't probably have this in your game, what you can actually do with this. So let me just, let me show you what that looks like. So let's hit play here, and you can, that wasn't too apparent. Let's try that one more time. I believe it should work now. So let's hit play here. And oh, I know why. We need to input the A here. Awesome. So now we have, we should have it actually working. Of course, we need to input the alpha and not the T. So now you should see this crazy curve working. So here, and you can see it fades back. So we can actually totally control how the fading occurs. I just thought that was a really, really neat detail. Awesome. So basically what we need to do now is just create a another version of this function that fades out. And then we need to, of course, actually play these functions at appropriate times. So let's just duplicate this entire method. And then let's paste it down here, and we'll call this one fade out. We'll have our t start at 0, and we'll have it animate until it's no longer less than 1. and instead of decreasing it every frame, we want to increase it. So now we need to of course call this method, and instead of just calling it directly from other scripts, let's create kind of a helper method that's easier to call than a coroutine. So let's just create a public void up here, public void, and let's call this something like fade2. And we also want to be able to specify what scene we want it to actually fade to. I mean, currently we're just fading to black and fading back in, but we also want to actually change scenes. So let's just specify as a string here the scene that we should transition to. And what we do then is just call fade out as a coroutine. So start coroutine, and teen, and the coroutine we want to start is fade out. And of course we need to pass this scene onto a fade out coroutine. So what we'll do is just add this as a parameter down here as well. So string scene, and we'll pass this scene onto there so it goes down here, and we can use it at the very bottom. So when we're done fading, we fade it to black and we're done with our animation, we reach this part of our code, and then we can go scene manager .load scene, and we can just input the scene that we just specified. Awesome. So that should pretty much be all we need to do in code. So what we can do now is of course call this, because well, we do need to call it from somewhere. But what I want to do is just package up the scene fader object into a prefab. So let's just expand our prefabs folder, let's drag it in there, and now we should be able to easily add it to our main menu as well. So let's jump into our main menu, let's drag our scene fader back in, and now when we make a change in one place, it's very easy to update in all of the other places by simply hitting apply. So let me just demonstrate how this works. Let's say use our main menu. So inside of our main menu, we currently have a play button. And if we press this button, it calls a load scene on the scene manager with the level to load. In our case, we want a reference to a scene fader instead. And you could very easily just go in here and say find object of type, scene fader, and then you could do something like dot fade to and input our level to load. And this would work just fine. But of course, find object of type does require a bit of computation. So what we'll do instead is just add a direct reference to our scene fader, which we'll call scene fader. And then instead of finding it, we'll simply use that reference. So scene fader dot fade to level to load. And then of course we just need to remember that we have to drag in our scene fader into the slot in order for that to work. But that should actually mean that now when we hit play, it fades in, we hit play, it fades out, and it fades into the next scene, and it looks awesome. So all we need to really do now is just add this to our retry button as well. You can see it always fades in, but we also have to make it fade out. To our menu, we haven't really done that transition yet, and to our game over screen. So let's just very quickly go through it. And in case you aren't using this for the tower defense course, you can just go and add it to the places that you would want it to fade in your game. So let's now go through our main level here. And let's find first of all our overlay canvas where we have our pause menu. And our pause menu of course uses a script on the game master called pause menu. Let's just double click this. So we have a function called retry, where you can see we currently use our scene manager to reload our currently active scene. Well, instead, let's first off create a public scene fader. Let's just call this scene fader, much in the same way we did before. And then we just go scene fader dot fade to, and we input our scene, which is going to be the currently active scene. So in this case, we use scene manager dot get active scene dot name, and we don't use build index because we've only implemented it with the name, but you could just as easily create a version of the function that used the build index instead. And of course, we also want to transition to our menu. So here we just want to go scene fader dot fade to, and then we input something like main menu. But instead of hard coding this in, it's always better to create a variable for it. So we'll do that as well. So we'll create a public string main, or something like menu scene name, and we'll set that equal to main menu by default, and we'll put that down there instead. So save that as well. And then inside of our main menu, that is fine. at last we have our game over screen, which is right here. And we have a few things that we want to edit about this as well. So let's open our game over menu. And just before I forget, under our pause menu, we also want to toggle our pause menu if we go to the main menu, or else the game is still going to be hung up and it's going to look weird with the fading and all that. We always want to disable that, so just make sure to call toggle on there as well. But inside of our game over, we should now be able to do the same to our retry. So we'll go up here, create a reference, public scene fader, and we'll go down here, we'll say scene fader dot fade to. It's the exact same piece of code. We want to fade to the same existing scene, so get active scene dot name. There we go. You can just copy this code even, and inside of our menu we go scene fader dot fade to, and then we want some variable for our main menu. Again, you can just hard code it, or you can create a public string called the menu scene name, which we call main menu by default, and then boom, I believe we're done. Awesome. So just save all of that. It's just inserting this code a few places in order to get this to work, and I believe now that things should actually be working. So one thing I'll just very quickly do is take our enemy prefab here and just bump up the start speed so that we can more quickly run through our level here. So now when I hit escape and the pause menu comes up, I hit retry, we get a null reference. Of course, we need to set all of the references up inside of Unity as well. So let's go under overlay canvas. Let's find our game over menu. We need to drag in our scene fader. We need to do the same thing for our game master under the pause script. We need to drag in our scene fader. And again, you won't get that problem if you use something like game object.find or find object of type, but this way is faster. So if you just remember to do that and are able to do that, definitely do so. It's just better on the computer. It's going to make your end user a lot more happy. So now we can hit escape, retry, fades out, fades in, looks awesome. We can hit menu, fades out, fades in the menu, hit play, goes back to the original scene. And let's just try running out of time here as well, or running out of lives. So our guy goes through here, completes the level, and we run out of lives. It says game over, and we can hit menu, for example. It's going to work just fine, and the same thing with the retry button. So that was basically all I wanted to show you for this video. I'm just going to reset our enemy while I still remember to do so. I hope you enjoyed this kind of very specific UI fading thing. I definitely think that using the curves here really give you a lot of control over exactly how you want stuff to happen. And yeah, I just thought it was a pretty cool, fairly unexplored approach. So yeah, hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Thanks to all of the awesome Patreon supporters who donated in October, and a special thanks to Sultan El Shadif, Faisal Marifai, and James Calhoun. Become a supporter at patreon.com/Brackeys.